to net zero. It's
along with this, try and get that kind of collective interest. And we've got the website up and running now, and that website is saying, why are we looking at this as a solution? You know, we're looking at this as a solution because we know the government has said in 2026, rural areas are not going to be able to upgrade their boilers to fossil fuel boilers. So suddenly in a few years' time, people are going to have to look into what are alternative low carbon heating solutions. So this is an opportunity. The community are trying to encourage people to say, okay, well, you're not going to be able to replace your old boiler. What are we going to do? Let's look at this together. Let's try and include everybody in our community in looking at these solutions, etc. So it's a really good website to take a look at. And it just speaks of this point around we have to bring people along with us, and it's the narrative of this journey. So personal action. I thought this was taken from the first website I showed you around the carbon baseline, and I thought it's really, really important to highlight this. Obviously, personal action is really important, but it's not as powerful as collective action. And it's kind of worth remembering that carbon footprints were invented by the fossil fuel industry to kind of give people that personal responsibility. And it does make people feel hopeless. You know, so I think trying to move us away from, you know, you are responsible for climate change, you know. And I think a really good example that they use is looking at cycling. You might really want to ditch the car and do more cycling, but you might live in a really busy A road where there's no cycle path and there's no way you're going to take your kids on bikes to school on that road. So, you know, although we want to do the right thing sometimes, we're unable to do that because of the structure of society. And individually, we're not going to be able to put a cycle path on that road. But if we join collectively together and make those demands, then we can really make that kind of meaningful change. So again, it's this kind of collective community action. Also, it's going to be cheaper and faster and more effective. So going back to the chipping project, looking at this collective solution means that not only do we get economies of scale, we also get an inclusive solution where people aren't going to be left behind. And each area is going to be a slightly different localized energy solution. And people know their communities best and they know their environment best. So we're best to try and work with communities to unpick what those local solutions are going to be. As Helen has already said, and Liz, the community energy network is incredibly collaborative. You know, we all know that we've got to have our shoulder to the wheel if we're going to get net zero done. And it's all about networks and the transfer of knowledge. And all this kind of community energy network increase our resilience to things like flooding and extreme weather, and certainly with COVID as well. It is about a just and equitable net zero transition. There's going to be lots of people who can't afford to replace an oil boiler with an air source heat pump and do that retrofit. We've got to think about the solution that will allow them to make those changes at the same time. And community wealth building, if we can keep that 2.5 billion in the Lancashire economy or Cumbria or Cheshire, you know, the numbers are similar anywhere, then that's a fantastic thing. And especially if it's owned, you know, if we're getting community owned assets up and running as well. But we need to have that broad church and we need to have the local authority working with communities as well. So just on Power Down, I'm not going to run through all this, but this is kind of in terms of, oh, I missed a slide. I think, yes, I missed a slide. Sorry. So in terms of goals, it's really good. I mean, an action plan doesn't have to be perfect. It's can be a very loose plan and very dynamic. But I think in your mind, you just have to have baseline, power down, power up, and plan. And within that plan, you need to have short, medium, and long-term measures. And just, you know, even if you're writing down, I've got 2 minutes, Liz. Is that 2 minutes, Liz? 2 minutes. Okay, thanks. Even if you're just writing in a spreadsheet. A little bit longer. Oh, okay, thanks, Liz. Even if it's just, you know, some notes in short-term measures, medium-term measures, long-term measures, there's some great interactive whiteboards you can share now. Get people to pile their ideas into different boxes on things like Miro boards or for example, and set out what it is you want to achieve. You know, short-term measures, can we achieve 25% by encouraging people to do small measures in their homes and behaviour change? Then can we look at retrofit and 50% deeper kind of measures? So in terms of short-term measures, there's loads that we can look at. And I think at the moment, obviously, we've got an energy crisis, we've got increase in fuel poverty. There's a great opportunity to work with our local communities to help them understand all the little tiny things that add up to make big differences on their bills. So, looking at potentially leaflets or doing a drop-in on energy efficiency or a webinar on energy efficiency. Can you train up community energy champions? Can you undertake energy audits in people's homes? Can you get some funding for a thermal image camera and get people trained up to use that? So there's lots of kind of short-term actions that can be put in place that would have a really big benefit this winter. And I've just listed a few things that you can share with communities around what they can do in their home to save carbon and cost. And then in terms of medium term, that's kind of looking at the deeper retrofit. So talking to people about internal wall insulation or external wall insulation. What is that? And what are the benefits? What about low carbon heat systems? What are they? What do they mean to the local communities? Can you look at community scale retrofit programs? And I've put a couple of links in there. There's one to Ambleside to Zero and one to Home Baked in Anfield. Both are looking at community scale retrofits. In terms of community scale heat, we've got 2 projects going on. I've mentioned chipping, and this is a project we've got going on in Rosendale, where we're looking at terrace streets. As you can see in the top left corner, they're not going to have space for air source heat pumps. So what is the solution for them? And how do you get that street to net zero? So lots of learning in these projects. I'm not going to go into details now. We have got the case studies webinar coming up, and I will show you some links shortly. So Rosendale, Terrace Street, chipping. This is obviously a rural off-gas grid community. And there's a link there to a project that we're copying, basically, which is in Cornwall, in a village called Stydians, and the project's called Heat the Streets. And also we're looking at sustainable travel. So how can we reduce, obviously we looked at those emissions earlier, and transport is really, really high. We've got to get people out of diesel and petrol cars and into electric vehicles, but we also need to reduce the amount of vehicles we have on the road as well. So great example here of Derwent Valley Car Club over in the northeast, and we're working with them to help us look at Keswick and Brampton and in Mellor to see whether rural EV car clubs could work there as well. So power down over the long term. I think it's important, again, it goes back to that narrative and that vision. What does the net zero community look like? Remind people that not that long ago we didn't have broadband, and now we all have broadband. Not that long ago, well, a few years back, but people didn't have central heating. Big changes do happen, and then we look back and we forget that there were those changes. So, and I think a really good tip is carrot, stick, and sermon. At the moment the carrot is people have got massive energy bills. We need to lower them. The stick is, for example, in rural areas, fossil fuel boilers, you're not going to be able to replace them after 2026. You need to think about new solutions. And the sermon is climate emergency. We're really close to tipping points, and it is now or never. I'll whiz through this really quickly. So powering up, what are the opportunities? I think in your local community, it's great to see, where can solar go? Can you have wind? Can you talk to people and find people with local expertise? There's lots of local knowledge on the ground. People in your communities will know landowners, etc. Community energy has the ability to raise finance. We have a model. Community benefit societies always use this investment model. That's how we raise our money to develop our projects. And that's really, really unique, that we know that when we're looking for projects, development funding's hard. I'm not going to lie about that, but the capital funding is fine. We can raise that once we've got a good project. There's loads of projects out there. The Community Energy England map has got all the case studies from the Rural Community Energy Fund projects, or in process anyway. Have a look on there in your area. You'll see solar, wind, hydro, and low carbon heat. Have a good look round and see, okay, what would suit my community? What will fit in our community? have a look at the Community Energy England how-to section, loads of great information there. And I love the Sustainable Overton website. They've got a brilliant toolkit. Please have a look around there, and I challenge you not to be inspired. Again, have a really loose plan around your power up. You've got short-term measures, get a good working group together, make a lot of noise about what you're trying to achieve, and think about all those domestic rooftops, look at group buy. There's a program called Solar Together that the local authorities have done. Can you encourage your local authority to run that? Look at solar co-ops. There's lots of great examples out there on that map previously. But then start speaking to landowners. What can you think about community-owned wind or hydro or solar? Large-scale projects take 3 to 5 years, plan accordingly. And the 6 to 10 years, we have to get more political. We need our local authorities to have statutory obligations to meet climate change targets. Local authorities at the moment can duck these targets. And I think politically we need to say more to our local politicians about what they should be achieving. Best practice, it's worth, again, talking about your local authority. Community Energy South have the Pathways programme. I think that's a really great thing because it creates this interface between local authorities and communities. Communities don't know everything, but local authorities certainly don't know everything. And if we can share and pool our information and our challenge together, then we're going to get where we need to go faster. And there's some good examples of best practice there down in Plymouth. So in conclusion, remember that it's a journey. And it does take time and commitment, but most importantly, it needs a really good team. Make it as wide a team as possible. People will come and go, that's fine. But, as long as you've always got a core team that can keep things moving, then it doesn't matter if people can just pop in and out. Everyone can bring some sort of expertise. Make noise about what you're doing. I think people sometimes have a bit of a fear about, well, what happens if we don't achieve our objectives? I say it's better to make noise and get people on board and have a go. And, it's about trying to achieve the objective and nothing's going to be perfect. Remember the kind of 4 corners are baseline, power down, power up and plan. And try and engage that it's all about a narrative, it's hearts and minds, but remember the carrot, stick and sermon. Loads of our emissions are down to domestic and transport, so we've got a big space to not only reduce carbon but also reduce cost in our local communities, which obviously at the moment is really crucial. There's loads of information out there. Hopefully you'll stick with the webinars that we've got planned and we can carry on trying to support your action. The plan doesn't have to be perfect, it's loose and dynamic. Try and work with the local authority. And if you can join Community Energy England, they have a Lumio chat for members, which is obviously across all around the country. There's so much knowledge on there and there's such support. So please use the people who are out there. And there's a great link to a video about consultation.
I'm sorry, Kate, I muted you when I was trying to mute myself. I'm so sorry, everybody. Ollie started talking to me, so I tried to mute myself and muted you, Kate. You'll have to unmute yourself because I can't unmute you. And I'm very sorry, everybody else here too.
No, I'm at the end there now, Liz, anyway. So hopefully there'll be lots of questions in the chat. And thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really interesting. I'm just going to say a few words while Ollie and Sarah line themselves up. Ollie, if you can get Sarah's presentation ready. Do please put any questions in the chat you may have or any takeaways. For me, actually, I took a really good takeaway, which was this idea about the fossil fuel industry making carbon emissions a personal issue rather than a community issue. That was a really big takeaway for me. So thank you for clarifying that. I'm going to hand over now to Sarah. Ollie, we can see the bits along the side. There we are.
This is coming up.
Good morning, everyone, and we'll start at the end.
Oh.
That's okay. So Ollie's very kindly agreed to do my slides, just to make sure my broadband is stable enough. So there will be a little bit of next slide, please, going on. But just to say, I'm delighted to be able to join you this morning. Settle has a lot of initiatives going on, and our Action on Climate Emergency group is only one of a number of activities. But we have taken the step to try and coordinate as much as possible and be a focal point. So I happen to be the coordinator at the moment. I'm a volunteer, as is everybody else, and I think we've achieved an awful lot because we're a motivated group of individuals who want to try and make things change. So just to sort of pick up a number of the things that Kate's been talking about on her last slide, we want to see change, and we know that we have to push for it and to be part of that. So next slide, please, Ollie. So just to broadly start off with a little bit about Settle. So Settle is, if you orientate yourselves, is a little bit, is about 15-20 miles north of Skipton, and about 20-25 miles east of Lancaster. So although we are North Yorkshire, and our local authorities are North Yorkshire, and our area regionally is the northeast, we do come quite close really to the northwest in lots of different ways. Helen at the beginning from Energy Northwest mentioned about the DNOs, the direct network operators. So Settle actually falls between two. So we fall between Electricity Northwest and also Northern Power Grid. So that might make things slightly more complicated, or it might maybe give us more opportunities. I think we're quite good at taking opportunities and pulling people in, so we'll do our best on that. So very briefly, Settle itself is a market town of around 2,000 people. We are a rural community. Settle has obviously been a long-term market town, so draws people in on market days and as a sort of a local resource for culture, for people meeting. Lots and lots of community groups are very active. That's not to say that all the local villages around, there's quite a number in about sort of 5 or 6 mile radius, are also very active. So I happen to be in the parish of Clapham, and Clapham has had a sustainability group for quite a few years, so we have some overlaps with them. So there is quite a lot of interest around community energy and what can be achieved. So I think, as well as obviously talking to larger audiences such as yourselves, we will be able to pull in a lot more kind of expertise and information to sort of help beyond just the sort of Settle an immediate area. So obviously that's going to be quite good in terms of just bringing everybody on board. We are partly in Settle, partly within the Yorkshire Dales National Park, so that obviously will have some additional planning issues for us as we progress to our projects. And we're also quite close to the Bowland AONB, so although they don't have quite so many sorts of stringent what's the word? I can't just think. But they're not quite as strict as some of the park commitments, but obviously that they do have to maintain their habitats and see that things are appropriately located. So as you can guess, with the rural environment, we're quite agricultural. There's a lot of pasture land, a lot of sheep and cattle on that pasture. We have some service industries. There's obviously a lot of hospitality, a lot of tourism, and then you have got sort of major impacts on the locality, such as quarrying. So I'll just refer to that a bit later, because it's quite an interesting sort of thought about if we start to put wind turbines and major sort of solar panel arrays up, is that there's already quite a lot in the landscape. So in terms of, I know, a bit of NIMBYism, for example, it's quite good to contrast really what's been happening over, say, the last 200 years of developments. We also have a higher percentage of older people. Some of those people are people who've come into the community. Some are just part of, obviously, an older demographic anyway. So that's kind of a two-pronged thing. The first is Those people, particularly who've moved in, are often people who, needless to say, can afford the higher prices of a nice area like Settle, but they do often, as retirees, bring a certain level of expertise. So I think that's very good. But also on the downside, obviously, with a lot of our local communities in lovely rural areas, there is a massive challenge in terms of being able to keep younger people in the local communities because of availability of jobs. Housing obviously is very expensive, and just the infrastructure to allow people to kind of be here and do their work here is still kind of catching up to some extent. Next slide, please, Ollie. Next slide, Ollie, if you're able. There we go. Thanks very much. So in Kate's last slide, she talked about sort of community commitment and kind of giving an opportunity maybe for people to come together to at least make a start. Nothing clearly is going to be perfect. So we, as a group, formed in March 2019. As of September, October 2022, we've now got 58 subscribing members. Our membership is something like £24 a year. But we've also got a total of 130 people on our mailing list. So we're building all the time, and that's obviously really encouraging. A bit of cash obviously gives us the opportunity to do events, to hire rooms, to provide a bit of money for bringing in some expertise. So with quite a, we haven't got very much. Our budget's about just over £1,000, but we're obviously able to do, make a start in many ways. So we also run what we call a monthly green cafe to bring people together, to have a drink and a chat. We run events, we have stalls and displays. So increasingly our reach and just our visibility, I think has been developing over these last few years. Quite early on, we developed some what we call themed groups, so that people who had particular areas of interest could actually participate. And it didn't mean that they had to get sort of snarled up on a steering group and kind of do some of the kind of slightly more boring business bits. We do have a steering group, we do have a constitution, and we have a bank account, but those 4 groups tend to be the drivers of our actions. So it's not just energy, but it's also transport, food and biodiversity. So we chose the areas that we didn't see were particularly happening with other groups, although there is interest in housing, there is interest in fair trade, and other kind of associated themes. We also keep in touch with people through a newsletter. We do media articles, we're on social media, and we have a website. We're also increasingly involved in consultations. So we've recently put in pieces to the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority's plan, which obviously, as you can see, is a long distance plan running through to 2040. And we talked a lot about transport within that. So that's been some of the stuff that our transport company's been doing. Settle Town Council declared a climate emergency a couple of years ago. They formed a climate and biodiversity subgroup, of which ACE is a member, and we tend to drive quite a bit of what they do, not because there's not the enthusiasm for the work, but it's just that the councils are obviously very stretched across all the different responsibilities that we have. So that's been quite a key group for us to be involved in. And we're also part of a newly formed group called the North Yorkshire Climate Coalition, which is a coalition of local climate action groups across the area of North Yorkshire. And because, as I'll mention a little bit later, we are going to be coming into a unitary authority from April 23. It's quite good to have across Yorkshire or across North Yorkshire group. So that's a little bit more engaging with the politicians and other sort of regional groups. So that gives us some sort of, in inverted commas, power to influence across the piece, really. So in terms of the next slide, ACE's Energy Group. So one of my colleagues, Keith Waterson, is on the webinar as part of the Energy Group, and is very welcome to chip in a bit later. So including myself and Keith, there are 9 of us in total with a variety of experience. We have very much, I think, clustered around our Energy Group lead, Sandy Todd, who's a retired engineer, a former director of Settle Hydro. Kate mentioned Settle Hydro briefly in her presentation, and has been looking at community renewable energy since 2001. To some extent has been banging his head against a brick wall for part of that time, but now he's recently moved to Settle. He's engaging with not only a motivated group of people, but obviously the climate in all sorts of ways is changed to enable some of the ideas that he's wanted to see over a long time, particularly around renewable energy. Hopefully start to happen. Most of us have domestic renewables in our homes. We've got project planning and communication skills, and as I say, we're highly motivated, which obviously is very important. Next slide, please, Ollie. So towards a plan. So we've been looking at developing a local area energy plan. It's comprehensive, but it doesn't include everything. So we've very much been looking at the powering up element. Obviously, Kate mentioned on her last slide, although we're very conscious about the whole powering down issue, and also kind of the base level information around, the whole energy mix, if you like. But for reasons that I'll explain a little bit later, we've decided to focus more particularly on powering up. So what we've done really over almost a year now, because we're just about to produce the final draft of our plan, so almost a year to November, we've had a number of activities that have brought us to this spot, and it's enabled us to engage with people. It's enabled us to bring players such as Helen and Energy Northwest, our local energy local enterprise partnership, our local council, as well as interested local people, but to do it in hopefully a fairly informative way and in a way that's quite engaging, but also kind of keeps pressing the point, as Kate was saying, obviously we have the climate emergency. We do need to get on with this as soon as we possibly can. So we held an online event, and obviously COVID struck only about sort of 5 or 6 months after we sort of formally started. But we were able to keep going as a group because of Zoom, being able to run various conferences, and we moved our green cafes onto Zoom, which actually worked very well. Needless to say, people brought their own cups of tea and cake, but we had lots of opportunity for people to share. So we regularly had 15 to 20 people turning up each month. And it meant also clearly, as with this webinar, that we were able to bring experts in who wouldn't perhaps have wanted to travel in person to Settle. So our first event then in this this sort of timescale was an event entitled Cutting Our Carbon. So we had speakers from Leeds University who had done a carbon sort of baseline report for our town council. We had also our town council who were talking about their climate emergency, and we also had somebody from the Yorkshire and the York and North Yorkshire local enterprise partnership talking about their route map plan, which is now a final version, but at that time was still very much being drawn up. So that kind of gave you it gave you kind of the town and the politics of the town, and it gave the sort of the more regional aspect as well. So we then moved on in February to a showing of a film called We the Power, which you might be interested in showing in your local communities. And this was based on a community in Germany, but also showcased other projects. So for example, in South London, there's been a community energy project putting solar panels onto some housing association properties. But essentially it was about that that community who decided just to do something about their local power. They did actually manage to take over the local energy generation as well. I'm not quite sure how they managed that, but and we're not trying to sort of go that far. I think they took over the energy grid locally. But I think the big message that they really told us was a small group of people can just do a huge amount. So that obviously was very encouraging. And then also, I think for me, at the end of the film, there was one of the members said, you know, initially we were a bit anti, people were a bit anti large wind turbines. But once they started to realise that that turbine was actually powering, you know, the energy which made energy bills lower, then actually you begin to love your wind turbine. So I think that was quite a nice sort of thought about how you can kind of switch, you know, just that, you know, the impact on a local landscape of massive change to making it kind of feel much more working for you. In March of this year, we then had a follow-up event, effectively, to Cutting Our Carbon. That was in person. Helen very kindly came along from Energy Northwest. We billed it as energy and transport so that we had people from our local Settle Carlisle transport line, railway line. We had our Methodist Church Eco Group who were doing all kind of things with their church. But we also, more importantly, I think, set the scene for being able to then run into having some workshops to really start to look at how we might have some community energy. So in May, and then a follow-up workshop in September, we've run 2 workshops, which I'll talk about briefly in a minute. And then in the middle, a 3-month period of consultation, which gave us an opportunity to put out a draft plan based on the workshop 1 outcomes, and then obviously to garner a bit of public response to that. Okay, moving on. Thanks, Ollie.
Sarah, I'm just conscious of time, so
yes, that's fine. How many minutes have we got left?
Well, we kind of went over with Kate's presentation, which was excellent. So probably about 5.
Yeah, that's fine then.
Great,
yeah,
thank you.
As I start speaking on one slide, Ollie, give me 1 minute, and then if you want to whiz on to the next one, so we don't have the slight lag. So this slide just gives you so Leeds University have done a report for our local town council, and that gives you the overall sense of how much carbon Settle's budget currently is. And we've only got another 5 years to just continue to emit what we're emitting, emitting and emitting hopefully over time to reducing quite significantly. So our group can only do a proportion of that. Next slide, please. But obviously we'll be looking very much at looking to reduce particularly sort of the domestic and some of the local business electricity demand. So those are just that's fine. Probably can move on from that. And then I'll talk very briefly about the first workshop that we did in May. So we used what's called a future energy landscape model that was produced by the Centre for Sustainable Energy and the CPRE, the Countryside Charity, which gave us an opportunity to first of all think about the local area, think about the current infrastructure. So I mentioned right at the beginning that we've got quarrying. Obviously at one time we didn't have railways, we didn't have pylons crossing the landscape. So it's given us an opportunity to kind of think about, you know, new infrastructure may not necessarily be a bad thing, and it can be kind of developed and we can get used to it. I mentioned about, you know, loving your wind turbine. And it very much gave the people who came to the workshop, probably about 20 in total, an opportunity to start to think about where we might put some of this renewable energy, where it might be suitable, and also exactly how much energy we could start to generate. So next slide, please, Ollie. That's a bit about our mapping. So you can see on the left-hand side, that's where we can start to say, right, well, we'll have X number of turbines and how much energy will that give us? So that was a nice tool to be able to see creating in front of us, where we might be able to you know, put up the renewable energy technologies and get our energy boosted. Next slide, please. Settling area, so not just Settle, has a population of just over 4,000, as you can see, consumes about 12.26 million kilowatts of electricity. So in terms of electricity demand, we can expect potentially to supply about 67% of the total energy, and particularly with powering down, we can make sure that we can be as self-sufficient as possible. That only is obviously electricity. You know, there are other aspects of the heat demand that we won't be participating in. So if we can just whiz through the next couple of slides, Ollie. Community support, we've done the consultations, we've got a little gallery on the green, it's so-called, in a telephone box, which has engaged people to talk about our proposals. Next slide, please. So we've now got some help from Community Energy South through the North East Net Zero Hub. So they are going to be helping us with our feasibility studies, our funding options. Kate mentioned about the Ambleside project with Cumbria Action for Sustainability. They've done a rooftop assessment, and we're looking to see if we can borrow their modelling for that. We're also going to be working with Energy Local to do a local energy club, which is usually going to be looking at large roofs and seeing what we can do in terms of solar arrays. And eventually we will obviously have to look at some kind of community energy company to raise the larger sums for wind turbines. And we'll be developing our local energy, local area energy plan for local adoption very, very shortly. And then I think we've just got one more slide. And then the whole kind of context of community energy, I've mentioned about the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Their route map to carbon negative obviously gives us a bit of a regional context to the work that we can do. We are moving into a unitary authority with a devolution plan for a mayor from 2024. We've also got a Yorkshire Climate Commission who are doing their best to show us the way, if you like. Obviously, whatever the national government scene is, makes a huge difference to what happens locally. Obviously, there is this discussion about fracking, but also wind. Slightly surprisingly, Rees-Mogg does seem to be talking about wind power. So we'll obviously go with that. And then obviously the two COPs, COP27 and the biodiversity COP15, obviously give us the world dynamic as well. And as we all know, clearly the energy security and adapting to higher energy bills and the climate extremes are really focusing at individual level about the changes that we need. So all of that in the mix is all very exciting, but there's a lot obviously to keep going and keep pulling down all the strands at local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And just well done. It's amazing in Settle what you're doing and gathering momentum like that. And with the link, you can see how it's evolving, you know, from developing your group to now having a local area energy plan and looking at those initiatives as well. So well done. And it's a perfect, dare I say the word, segue into Nicki Myers, who's next, where Nicki's from Ovesco, which is a group that was set up in 2009. And but Ovesco have also just been successful in something called the Lottery Climate Action Fund, which is really good for groups like yours in Settle, where you started to build a climate action strategy. And the lottery fund that Ovesco have been successful in is actually £2 million now. And as well as nature-based recovery work, it's providing funding for them to have a network of energy champions to do the powering down, and Nicki leads on that. So I'll hand over to Nicki. You have to stop sharing.
Right.
Stop sharing.
Hello. I will share my screen, hopefully. There we go.
While you're doing that, I just want to comment on how inspiring it is to see from Sarah's presentation the growth from just a few people to such ambition. It's really inspiring. And yeah, Nicki is the next step in that. So I'll be quiet now and hand over.
Thank you, Liz. So thank you to Kate, because I really enjoyed your presentation, Kate, and that really inspiring overview of getting people motivated to come into their community groups. And then amazing that Sarah then talked, you know, about everything that's happening in Settle. So what I'm going to talk about really is a particular plan for your community. So once you've got your group engaged, you as you both talked about, you may want to get more of a plan together. First of all, very quickly talk about Ovesco. I'm a project manager at Ovesco, which is Ouse Valley Energy Services Company, and we're down south and we're in East Sussex, so quite a long way away from most of you people. So we've been concentrating in our area and on a village locally to Lewes for the projects that I'm going to talk about. So oh dear. Here we go. So here is all about Ovesco, and our vision is for this future which 100% of our energy needs are generated locally from renewable sources. And we part of what we do is concentrating on putting solar PV onto rooftops and maybe even a solar farm locally. And these are all the kind of things that we've been doing. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Kickstart, and we've developed this program, and it's come out of communiheat, which I'm going to go into some detail about. You can see the logo up there on the right hand side. And Kickstart is a program which allows your community for you to work with your community group, and it gives you an outline community energy plan. And quite a lot of what Kate and Sarah have talked about interacts with this. It brings the carbon and the energy usage of the community together. It gives you an overview of how properties are heated within your parish and community, and specifically for the types of properties, the archetypes of properties within your community. And it reviews that archetype. It also brings together a list of local heat and energy suppliers, so people can really start to move forward to, say, fitting heat pumps or getting PV onto their houses if that's what they would like to do. And it's a great way to bring your community together. You can have an event around this, and also it also gives you a printed and a digital report of all of this. We've been working with a village in Essex called Littlebury, and I'm going to show you the front page. It's hot off the press actually, which is here is the report. This is the front page of the report, and it's quite a few pages long. It's 33 pages long, A5, and it's got some really detailed information around that particular community, what they could do, and how they can, say, for example, generate their own power locally. And all this came out of a communiheat project. And communiheat project came out of the challenge of how we can move from oil heating, because we were looking at an off-gas grid community, Barkham, which is near Lewes, and how we can, how that community can move from oil heating to electric heating, and also how does that community also move towards electric cars as well. This is an enormous problem because we are also working with a constrained electricity grid, so we're looking to really increase our use of electricity, and how can that work with a community that wants to move to electricity for everything. So here are some kind of headline figures. Oil heating is more carbon intensive. Houses which are heated by oil tend to be older, harder to heat. This is more expensive as well, so people tend to be more in fuel poverty in these areas. So communiheat developed the roadmap which aims to understand the capacity needed from the electricity grid supplier, the district network operator, to allow rural communities to switch to low carbon heating, using electricity in a way that ensures future comfort, affordability, and a smooth transition. And basically it's linking up the DNO with the community in our area, we worked with UK Power Networks on this project. So we worked with the DNO, and we then worked also with an engineering company to bring all this together to make this link, because this link doesn't exist at the moment, and it's crucial. And it's crucial because the DNO needs to understand what the future capacity of the electricity grid will be in order to be able to know how much they need to upgrade it. So the communiheat project was started in the middle of the pandemic, so that was quite interesting. And we went into people's houses and we surveyed a selection of houses in real time to see actually how much energy the village uses, because you can look at EPCs, for example, the energy performance certificates that you have to have if you move house, but actually they tend to be quite laboratory conditions, whereas we wanted to find out really what people used, how much energy people really used in their houses. And we took this information as well as all the information from UK Power Networks, which showed where all the electricity grid was. And Borough Happold, our partner in this project, the engineering company, they took all this information and they put it into a digital twin of the village. They made a digital twin of the village with all this information. And then they were able to come up with various scenarios, future scenarios, to see how the grid acted, how it would be, how much it would cost people to heat their houses, what would happen if they retrofitted insulation into their houses to reduce the heating demand. And of course, all this ultimately comes down to the household, how much this will cost the household to retrofit and bring their heating costs down. And this is a snapshot of the digital twin. There is so much information in this software, but this is the kind of information that an individual will be able to pull out, so they can see their house and they can see how much they currently used and how much, if they retrofitted, how much power the house would need. And also it will also show them how much carbon they're saving as well. So what we also we developed through this project was some other measures to enable the community to work together on this, to make this plan. So we looked at setting up a village members co-op, where local people can invest in local renewables and also receive support from this network of local energy champions that we see that is crucial to support people in this transition. To also establish a local energy service and a trusted network of local installers. We need to really increase the amount of people who can put in heat pumps and PV, because there will be an enormous demand in the future. To work with the DNO, as I've mentioned, in our area, UK Power Networks. Investment opportunities, you know, obviously we like to keep all the wealth local, within the local community. Look into low interest loans for retrofits. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's very few grants available for retrofitting. The only one that's readily available for some households is the £5,000 for an air source heat pump. If you're on lower income, there are some more options available, but not that many. To look into a local energy bill tariff, a time of use tariff, flexing and trading with energy markets. But obviously we're quite hampered because of the way that energy has to be charged for in this country. Sarah mentioned the film from Europe. In Europe, energy is arranged in a slightly different way, so you can sell energy locally like that. yeah, generally supporting the community in this transition, so it's a smooth transition for people and people feel comfortable transitioning, because ultimately we're asking people to put in, or with heat pumps are a different form of heating your house, a different system of heating your house. Okay, and we also came up with a home action plan for every single household in the village Barkham where we worked. 150 of those were actually personalised from the results we took from the survey, but there is a general step-by-step plan of how to decarbonise. And I'll just, you won't be able to see this, but I'm going to flip through one and read you out the stage one will be to calculate your carbon footprint, and then to lower your carbon footprint through changes in how you can live. Stage two will be how to retrofit your house with insulation, and then go through the generation of heat and power, and then renewable heating, grants and funding, and then also community owned local renewable energy. And then we have a section for people's personal home action plan. And we have a website for this project that you could go and have a look at, called communiheat.org. And there's a PDF version of this action plan available. Now, obviously it's specific for Barkham, but you know, you could replace the local list of installers, for example, with a list of installers in your own area. And these are some of the results that we saw from communiheat, and really it's quite remarkable savings that can be achieved for people. So if we go with a more planned approach, we see that we can get 500 heat pumps installed out of 700 households instead of the 340 installed in an uncoordinated approach. That we can get 430 homes retrofitted, that there'll be a 20% energy saving in annual electricity demand versus an uncoordinated approach. And ultimately, that there is a 75% saving in network reinforcement costs. And you may say, well, that's just for the advantage of the DNO UK Power Networks, but actually all the costs of network reinforcement come back onto our electricity bill. We pay for those in a proportion of the cost of our electricity bill. So the cheaper that is, the better for everybody. We also were able to spot 17 renewable sites, for 15 for small PV farms. We're looking at 200 kilowatts approximately per farm. And there's site for potential 2 wind farms. Now, if you did this for your community, there may be options for, say, more wind farms and less PV, depending on your geography of your community. And then this is ultimately what it's about, isn't it? Future generations. And this is one of our directors, Nick, showing children how electricity is made. And there we go. Thank you. That's my presentation, and these are my contact details.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was really interesting. We've got some questions that have come up in the chat box. I'm not sure if the questions were for you or for you, Kate and Sarah. So I'm going to ask Janet and Fliss to each unmute themselves and start with their questions. And then I'm going to hand over to Ollie, because he has a couple of questions. If you, others of you, if you have questions, do put them in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll hand over to you. So Janet and or Fliss, have either of you unmuted yourselves?
You mean me? You mean me?
Yes, go on. What's your question? Put your question.
Oh, well,
I don't know if there's answers.
Right. What I was I mean, the people that you've been talking about so far, by and large, all homeowners. It would be interesting. I think somebody's already asked about rented properties, how we can engage and encourage people who or organisations who own rented property. But I suppose, you know, in a holiday area, I'm at least as interested in how we can engage people who own houses that are their second homes, that they may use for part of the year, and also our many holiday lets and places like caravan and lodge parks. I wonder how we can work with and engage them, because there must be a benefit to them, but also it could encourage people to put back into the local community. So any ideas about that? I mean, it's not a major problem in my village, but we do have holiday lets here and we have a lodge park, but it's a substantial problem across the Lake District.
Kate, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. So that is for social housing, and registered social landlords would be able to access that. And historically, those kind of bigger social landlords have been pretty good at being, you know, pioneers in retrofit. And low carbon heat, and they've had a lot of grant funding money from government. The sector which really struggles is the private rented sector, and that's kind of a bit of a hole in policy right now. How do we actually persuade the private rented sector to do something about housing stock? I think the key that I'm trying to work towards is, I mean, the slide on the Rosendale project looking at the Terrace Street and Bakeup. And there we're looking at a terrace street, which is going to have all sorts of different housing on there in terms of tenure. So there might be some people who own their own homes, there might be some private rented, there might be some social landlord. And the key is, I think, is to find a solution that's going to be inclusive of all those different people. So that's why this kind of community scale solution avoids that problem, because obviously if you've got private rented, you've got to not only persuade the landlord, you've then got to persuade the tenant that they might have to move out or whatever. So it becomes very complicated. So community scale in terms of a solution that is inclusive and homogenous to an entire street, I think is the key. In terms of park homes, there is funding for park homes because often they're not on the gas grid. So there should be, you know, so often when you look at things like HUGS grant, so HUGS, if you have a look on that website, that I think they are inclusive of people who are in park homes. It's quite defined who can apply for HUGS grant. You know, people who are on universal credit, or there's a whole kind of list of people who can apply. But yeah, park homes are definitely one that are focused on. In terms of second homes, I mean, that just is down to the people that own the home. And again, I think that if there's a collective solution at community level, that means that people don't have to go away and do their own research and they're going to try and find some money to do it all. It's much easier for people to actually get on board if there's a community solution. So I don't know whether that's any help, Janet. I'm afraid there's no easy answers.
Sort of. Yeah, it is sort of. I mean, the park homes issue, it's not so much people who live there, but it's holiday lets, where the site is owned by a big landowner.
Right.
And it's let out for a week or a couple of weeks at a time throughout the holiday season. But I suppose what I'd say about second homes and holiday lets is that you're often talking about absent landlords. And, you know, you're talking about people from London, Manchester, so on, who, and it's been an increasing issue during COVID, because many people who've had quite a lot of spare cash, when they've been looking to where to put it, I understand that a substantial number of house sales in the Lake District during lockdown have been to second homeowners.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
They're not here for a lot of the time, and then when they come here, they're here for a couple of weeks, and then they go again.
Of course. I think Nicky's got a contribution to make, but before you do, Nicki, Fliss also asked that question. Fliss, do you have anything additional to add as a question on this?
Only the other question I asked, which was about critical mass in terms of how big a community you need for these kinds of projects to get going. Because I thought when you were talking about Settle and the numbers involved in the organisation were tens, orders of magnitude more than we've got. We've got basically a kind of handful of people at the moment just to trying to start something off. And it relates back to the previous issue, I think, because we have a park home park in our village, which is actually not in our parish, oddly. And we've just been co-opted onto the parish council as a working group. It seems like we maybe need to coordinate with the next door village to get the critical mass. Do you think that sounds like a thing I need to worry about?
Bliss, I'm going to jump in there, and I think that what Nicki has described and what Sarah has described is that exactly that. It's the thing is that as a community energy group, you can be very focused on your one community. What is coming apparent here is to broaden your area. So to look at a market town, look at all the parishes that serve that market town, engage with the parishes, and then broaden your reach so that you've got a larger group to work on areas. And I think that's important. And what Nicki has done with communiheat is look at a community of 700 homes, but actually what she described in Littlebury is 500 homes. But then when you start to connect their neighbouring communities, suddenly you're looking, 5 parish communities, 2,500 homes, and then you're creating local jobs. So, and that's really important, local green jobs as well on top. So I hope that helps.
Yeah,
Nicki's got a point to add.
Yeah, it's just it was just about private landlords actually, because Kate's quite right, it's such a problem, and we feel that this is an area which is the hardest to support. But I just wanted to add, I don't know if you have the same situations in your area, but we have estates that own large amounts of properties, and often they're quite elderly properties, they're 100, 150 years old, sometimes listed, very hard to heat. And we're starting to work with the estates in order to, at least for them to have a plan to upgrade the houses in due course. And this seems to be, quite a good way to approach it, just for kind of large landlords, basically. And that was just the comment I had to make.
Thank you, Nicki. We did actually do a webinar on how to deal with private rented accommodation. We didn't have an awful lot of solutions, but it is worth having a look at. It's on our YouTube channel. And Dr. Brenda Boardman from Oxford Uni had a fair bit to say. So do look that up. I'll see if I can find the link and post it here. Can I hand over to Tony, who has an entirely different question? Tony Claydon.
Hi, thank you. I'm the chair of Felton Can Climate and Nature, which is based in the middle of Northumberland. We sent letters initially to all the local landowners that we could identify. We had no helpful responses. We were looking for funding for a feasibility study regarding renewable energy options for our villages. And so 2 questions really. Any thoughts about how you can engage landowners and hopefully gain a more positive response? Secondly, what comes first? Finding land that might be suitable for renewables, or undertaking a feasibility study, which of course requires funding, which we haven't been able to get so far?
Ollie, are you able to answer that? You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I did. I saw your question, Tony. So yeah, I think I would like to say both of them come together, because with your group, you'll know local landowners and local people, but also in having the plan, you'll realize where you can connect renewables and the best type. And I think that once you go to a landowner and describe the community energy model and how it works, they're either going to be interested or they're not, but they should be interested when they know that it provides them with cheaper energy and it brings in the community. So community businesses are really important in that. Now, on the feasibility funding, I'm going to urge everybody to look at their local district councils, So district councils now have something called shared prosperity funding and also the Rural Development Fund. Now, those two funds that devolve funding from central government to your districts and boroughs actually have criteria that supports the community energy sector. So do ask that question, go back to your district and borough climate teams and ask them about shared prosperity funding and the Rural Development Fund, because within there we do have feasibility funding. And then and just connect basically and keep in touch with Community Energy England and Community Energy South, and we'll try and the net zero hubs, and keep on in touch with them, because feasibility funding will start to unlock, hopefully. But yeah, share prosperity funds in your local district councils.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other questions?
I was just going to add into that, Liz, if
Yes,
that's
please do.
okay. So, I mean, Tony, in terms of potential sites, I mean, there was a couple of links that I had on the presentation. One's for a wind map, and that's really useful just to look at, you know, where are the windiest places. So that's worth having a look at. And then, you know, you can also always look at the landowners where there are the windiest spots. And then obviously you have to think about constraints for something like wind and any kind of renewable energy. You've got to think about how visible it is. So whether you're looking at ground mounted, you know, are people going to be overlooking it? How visible is it from streets or roads? In terms of wind, you know, you need at least a 500-meter buffer, which is really easy to do on Google Earth because you've got a little ruler there, so you can find a good potential wind spot where you've got good wind speeds, and then you can see how close the nearest house is. And then I suppose the third point on that is where you are going to take that electricity. So if you've got a really big energy consumer nearby, like a factory or a big school, then that might be a good place to think about sending the electricity with a private cable, or then speak to Northern Power Grid if you're over in the northeast, and see to them, see whether they have got capacity on their grid. There are things called heat maps. So Electricity Northwest, I can just Google Electricity Northwest heat map, and it shows me where the substations are, and it will tell me on there what those substations are like in terms of capacity. So within kind of, you know, quite quickly, you know, 5-10 minutes scoping, you can discount sites, or you can think, well, actually this site might be useful, this could be a good one, let's see if we know a landowner. So there's a fair bit you can do just at a computer in an evening to try and highlight where there might be some good sites, and that can determine the conversation you have with the landowner. I think small landowners are good as well, so people who've got small holdings rather than like the big estates, because, you know, anywhere where you've got lots of decision hierarchy, I call it, where, you know, whereas if it's a small family owned small holding, they're much more likely to go, no, we're not interested, or, oh, this sounds really interesting, yes, we are. So think about, you know, when you think about landowners, like who are they and who are going to make decisions.
That's really great. Thank you, Kate.
I'm going to hand over to Paul, and then I'll hand over to you, Michael. Paul Taylor, who had a question that Ollie has started to answer, but Paul, do speak your question out and see if anybody else online has some other suggestions.
Yeah, well, it's more an observation than a question, I guess. We come in under Ribble Valley Borough Council in Longridge, and quite frankly, they're just totally disinterested in any form of discussion about climate or any, you know, any kind of thing in that area. So I just wondered if anybody else was in the same position and how you managed to get them on board. I noticed Ollie's response talked about talking to your MP. Well, it's just a brick wall when you talk to our MP. So we've got dozens and dozens of letters that just get the same response back, which is basically a stone wall.
Are they not concerned about energy prices and the impact on fuel poverty?
Well, that I guess that's more recent. Not had specific engagement since energy prices started going where they are, it's a very affluent area and they're very conservative, and most of them are wealthy landowners. So I'm not sure how much of a lever that is in this region.
Well, I'm going to invite people to put suggestions in there. Certainly, I know that what happened down south is we had South East Climate Alliance that went round and put huge amounts of pressure on local authorities to declare a climate emergency. And once they declared a climate emergency, they then had to actually take action.
Yeah.
So yes, please, people, put your suggestions of what your group has managed to achieve, or what your local, how you've managed to convince your disengaged local authorities. Oh, Ollie has something to say. Then I'm going to hand over to Michael. So please unmute yourself, and then Fliss.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Paul. I mean, you know, I said lobby your MP, but also the leader of the council, but also consider now, you know, with this cost of living crisis, that the councils will be being asked these questions about what they're doing about energy, and also they've got to start reaching their targets as well. I'm just looking at the Ribble Valley climate change strategy. You know, familiarize yourself with that and start, you know, and look to see if they've got a climate officer or an energy officer that you can speak to. But also make the point that the Shared Prosperity Fund should be supporting this sector and this work. So yeah. So reach out if you need any help.
Yeah, thank you. Michael.
Michael Bond. I'm muted or not. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, I was going to sort of ask or discuss how the various local groups are actually funding themselves, because I know obviously money is always going to be the first issue to deal with. But as you've spoken in the last few minutes, you've all been hit by that magical stone wall of dealing with your local councils and local politics. And the strategy that I'm beginning to work up now, which perhaps could be open to all of you, if you want to talk to me about it, if I succeed on it, is to look at how I can mesh fundraising through property development. So I'm going to give you an example. I've got a plan to build a small weir as a hydro dam on a local river, and nearby there is a local community, what is it now, help centre, local community centre for the main country park that we have in Stockport. It's a really beautiful park and does need an upgrade. And part of my plan would be to raise property investment funding to put into the community centre to restore and rebuild that as a much more enhanced small business centre. And that in turn uses the output from the hydro scheme, but also independently supports or potentially supports local businesses, which then generate the income, which provides both the profit for the investors, the bank or the finance agencies who put their funding into the visitor centre, and obviously through the revenue from that visitor centre pays for the hydro dam. Now, on a much larger scale, I've also been looking in the town centre where there may be an opportunity to convince the council on a £200 or £300 million project to build a much larger scheme, which could also be hydropowered by sticking another dam or 2 or 3 dams on the Mersey. It's quite nice and busy, the Mersey. It just occurs to me that that's one way in which funding can be raised for projects, by looking at the business aspect and how, as it were, the business side can become an attractor to outside investment, because I know obviously a lot of community projects struggle for raising that money, but there's potentially a lot of money in the property development market if you've got things that can be done in your local communities. And if there are, and if I succeed on my scale, then perhaps I can bring that idea into your areas if it's something of interest to you.
Thank you, Michael. Ollie or Kate, do you want to comment on that? Looks like possibly not, but also do reach out to us, because I know we have if you haven't already got contacts that have done hydro, there are quite a few community hydro schemes, and you definitely ought to link with Kate on hydro. Are there any other questions? because a minute ago, a couple of people had their hands raised.
So I'm just going back to the pool, because I think this is irrelevant for everybody. So Paul from Ribble Valley, Kate has made a very good point in the chats. The Ribble Valley Borough Council have 400,000 in a rural development fund. This includes in there the criteria for capital funding for community energy projects, but that has to be bespoke to the Borough Council. Have a look at it. And then I've also linked in there your climate change strategy for Ribble Valley, page 19. It says to support communities on climate change. So, you know, that's, you know, you can tell them, shout back the policy to them.
Thank you, Ollie. Right, I'm conscious of the time, and I know we've got Shannon Jackson here from Community Energy England, who was going to say something about the Lumio board, but she's having Wi-Fi issues. So Shannon, if you are able to unmute yourself and speak, please do. And then I want to hand over to Kate to just summarise and mention the carbon literacy training. But let's see if Shannon has managed to unmute herself or if she's disappeared. Let me see if she's still here.
No.
Is she still there?
Let's see.
No, it looks like she's fallen out. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you, Kate, just for our last 5 minutes to talk about carbon literacy, which could also be another, ultimately could be a source of revenue generation.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Yes, as part of capacity building work for the Rural Community Energy Fund, we have got funding to work with CAFS, which is Cumbria Action for Sustainability, and we're delivering, well, we're doing training for 15 places in carbon literacy, but then for people to go on to become a carbon literacy trainer themselves, which the idea being that they can then use that skill and accreditation to go out and work within their community, get paid to actually deliver carbon literacy training. That might be to, you know, parish councils, Rotary Club, U3A, or actually the local authority. So if you are interested in becoming a carbon literacy trainer, then if you can drop me an email, that would be great. We've got the dates, so I can send those over. I think it's basically 3 half-day sessions, which will all be online. One is November, one's December, one's January, so they're quite spread out. And then there's further kind of 6-hour support, drop-in support from CAFS to help you kind of get up and running as a carbon literacy trainer. If you're not aware of the carbon literacy programme, it's something that's being rolled out. So I know Helen from Electricity North West, they're rolling it out within the Electricity North West. Certainly at Lancashire County Council, we've done a pilot. So the team that I sit in, 15 people there have done their carbon literacy training. It's really good. It's really informative, even for people who have got, you know, a deep knowledge on climate emergency. It's really useful and in terms of how they create that narrative and in a positive way that empowers people. So I do recommend the training itself, but it would be great if you feel that you can work within your community to kind of cascade that learning. I think it's really impactful and a great way for community groups to grow their networks as well. So do let me know if you'd like to take part and drop me an email. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Kate. Right, well, just as we're about to leave, I can't believe we're actually on time, which is amazing. Just to say, if you want to share the chat, if you want to save the chat, in case you don't know how to save the chat, because there are useful links and email addresses in there, you can, in the bit where it says type message here, you'll see 3 little white dots. And if you click on the 3 little white dots, you can save chat. But also, I suggest before you save chat, if you want to make yourself available to contact other people, you know, I'm hoping that you have all been messaging each other privately and sharing information that has been a lot shared on here. Do feel free to put your email in the chat so people can make contact with you, because, you know, it might be useful. There might be people you want. So yeah, pop your email in the chat if you want to make contact with people, and then save the chat. And I will close this call in about a minute or two. So actually, Michael, would you stay on? Because Ollie and I would really like to talk to you about your optimizer. Yeah, great. And thank you very much to all of our speakers. And thank you all for participating. I hope you found it helpful and useful. I suppose I ought to tell you that in 2 weeks' time, it's on Eventbrite. I think it's the 2nd of November in the evening. We're having another session, case studies of some really, really interesting projects that people have done in the north. We're covering EVs, and they're about to massively expand. So a car club for a local village, which is about to massively expand. We're doing, somebody's giving a presentation about a community wind project. There's also going to be a presentation about solar community buildings across Northumberland. Yeah, thank you very much, Nicki, for your time. I know you've got to go and do some energy training. And we're hoping to have a couple more case studies too. So do look out for that, and please encourage people to join, because there's always so much to learn from each other. And I think it's so inspiring to see people being able to take positive action rather than just sitting about moaning and feeling a bit powerless. So yeah, do please come again on the 2nd of November. I think that's the date. I know it's in the evening. So thank you, everyone. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's
Thank
Helen.
you.
Thanks for putting that in there, Helen. On it.
Thanks a lot, Liz. Bye,
Great. Thanks so
everyone.
much for coming, everyone.